I'm here with this great background of sitting out on the plaza here at Wesleyan. Actually, I'm in Michigan, but and Michigan's weather today, at least a few minutes ago, was pretty much like the weather that you see in the background here. But now it's starting to get a little cloudy, so I don't know. We might get rain here. I'm here with Andrea Grubb Barthwell, who I haven't seen for many, many, many years. Uh, and we were part of the somewhat of the same gang back in Wesleyan days. And not only that, we went from Wesleyan to the University of Michigan at the same time, along with another classmate, Norita Milburn.
Right.
And who else? Who else was there? Uh,
Um, Beverly Tatum,
Beverly, yeah, Beverly Tatum
year
was
ahead of
there
us.
a year before us. She
Yeah.
was
She
already
lived
there.
in she lived in the same complex that Norita and I lived in.
Yeah, and I remember that complex out there, out
Yes.
on the west, kind of west side of town. Andrea, who I call Andy, I don't know if you still go by Andy,
I do.
but we call her Andy back in the days. Andy and I are both from Michigan, and I'm from Detroit, and you're from a town called
Parma, Michigan.
Parma, Michigan. We started our journeys in Michigan, and then we both went to Wesleyan together, and then we both came back to Michigan. I stayed here, and you went on to Chicago to go to do your internship after medical school. Um,
That's correct.
and but we were both doing psychology together for a little while, for a moment. I remember doing some study group that you were involved in with Norita and some other folks that we were doing back in graduate school at the University of Michigan. So I went on and had a fairly normal life, and you went on and had a really extraordinary life, and that's what I want to talk about. Not only are you one of the members of the trustees of Wesleyan right now, which is always great to have someone from '76 on the trustee board. It's really nice. We've done really well having members on the board of trustees. So thank you for serving. I want to say that early in the interview. Thank you for serving on the board of trustees for Wesleyan. It's always been good. But you are Andrea Grubb Barthwell, MD, with a whole bunch of other letters and accolades behind your name. And you're the director of Two Dreams, and we're going to ask you about that. It's a comprehensive alcohol and addiction treatment program, and you're also the founder of Encounter Medical Group, PC, which is in the Chicago area, right?
Yes.
And you're an expert on all kinds of things, and just completely amazing person. Okay, you were nominated and served in the Bush administration,
Yes.
and were somewhat of the drug czar, uh, is
Deputy
in
drug
the
czar.
vernacular. Uh,
Yes.
we call that. And your life's work, it seems to be, since we parted ways, was to find out a way to help people who have been struggling with addiction.
Treat addiction, save lives. That's the motto of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And that's where I've had my medical home all these years. Treat addiction, save lives.
Americans are so addicted to everything. Drugs is one of them. and and
That's
and
our that's our rugged individualism. And I listen to people talk about drug policy in Europe and look at some of what they've done there and talk about bringing those policies here as if they would work, but they wouldn't, because Europe isn't based on that notion of rugged individualism. But as a Wesleyan note, my having served as the deputy drug czar for Bush almost caused me not to be elected as a trustee, alumni elected trustee the first time I ran. There was actually an internet campaign that was mounted against me because I took a stance against the medicalization of marijuana. And there was a lot of movement that got started to make sure that I didn't get elected to the Board of Trustees. And for one thing, I have opposed the medicalization of marijuana, but I've never taken a public stance on opposing the legalization of marijuana. The issue for me as a physician was that I believe in the process of FDA approval of medications and having robust data on which to base a medical decision.
With Wesleyan, there's always controversy on issues, especially when it comes to progressive issues.
But when you work for an administration, cabinet or sub-cabinet level, your job is to market and sell and promote the president's policies. All those policies get set on the campaign trail. There are people there who watch promises made, promises kept, and they want to keep you accountable for helping that guy get done what needed to get done. But as far as Bush went on drug issues, the first time I met him, he told me that he was a recovering alcoholic and that if he led a nation that was hard on drugs, he wanted to be compassionate toward people with the disease. I don't know how you really take issue with that. And the drug issue is a bipartisan issue. And in fact, I know that I was selected in order to help bring others to support the nominations of others who were being nominated in that office to serve under Bush. I'd actually been selected by Clinton's drug czar to serve under Clinton, but because of Monica Gate, my name wasn't able to be put forth for Senate confirmation. So I was a kind of a holdover that was in a pile of discards when the Bush administration came in, and they had sent some other names up, couldn't get confirmed, and they finally gave me a call and was able to get me through the process.
So what are you doing? Let's talk about what you're doing right now.
Pre-COVID, I'd actually wound down a lot of what I was doing, and I was looking to retire with my husband. I left Michigan, as you say, after medical school to join him in Chicago. So David and I got married in 1980. We have 3 children who live in Chicago. And I was winding down all of my sort of business operations to get ready to travel the world with him, and COVID hit. And we found ourselves as of March 11 in that year, locked in our condo together with no travel on the horizon. I mean, and it's while we're both now doubly vaccinated and can start thinking about travel again, the rest of the world has to get vaccinated before we feel really safe about it, both at our age and with other things that are going on with us. So I began to work again, and I am working with a group that is led by a group of women who have brought other drugs to the market, and we're trying to develop a version of naltrexone, the drug that reverses opioid overdoses, as an over-the-counter product. We hope to price somewhere around $10 to $15 a dose. And our early data from the lab looks good, looks promising. And, we are hoping that we can treat addiction, save lives, because not only do you have to reverse the overdose, but you have to get people to treatment afterwards. And I worked on helping get a bill passed that requires emergency departments to link people to treatment after an overdose reversal. And while that happens, because of COVID, most people are being reversed in the field now, and they're not even getting to emergency departments. So we're trying to scramble to figure out how do we honor the intent of that law if people don't even get into the confines of an emergency department. Medication-assisted treatment, buprenorphine, Data 2000. And early in my career, I did some research that allowed us to write Data 2000 and to show that physicians with a certain amount of training could treat people with an opioid use disorder in the office. They didn't have to be treated in methadone clinics. So the basis for that got expanded a bit because of COVID, because we eliminated some of the requirements of the face-to-face visit. But when we wrote that law, we also required that people who were started on buprenorphine would be referred into psychosocial therapies by the physician. And only 10% of people who get buprenorphine actually get referred on. So it's a barrier that many people don't cross. And so I'm working with a group that has developed the first FDA prescription digital therapeutic. And we're hoping to get it into the hands of people who are receiving buprenorphine from their physicians by telemedicine, so that they at least have an episode of care when they start. So everything that I'm doing now, as a result of coming back to work because of COVID, is really swirling around that notion that if we treat addiction, we can save lives.
Get somebody into emergency room, you patch them up, get them alive again, and send them back out again, and then they're still addicted.
What they typically did was went to the parking lot and shut up. If you reverse somebody, they're in withdrawal. And if you don't do something in that moment of crisis, the further you get from it, the less currency it has in their life to affect a change. And you really got to take that moment of crisis and take the energy and the momentum that gives you to get people to take the next step. And, there are no magical cures, it's all work, but, a journey towards recovery. And there are lots of pathways to get there. And there are a number of people now who have realized that, and medicine is becoming more involved. And a lot of my colleagues in primary care are doing more things on the front end with harm reduction to bring people in or keep people alive until they get treatment. And then my other colleagues in addiction medicine do harm reduction on the back end if a full episode of care doesn't help somebody make the kind of change, systemic, environmental, community change that allows them to be abstinent. They're working with them on the back end to try to keep them benefiting from the gains made in treatment or building on the gains made in treatment. And so we sort of have come full circle. And there's a lot more acceptability to things that during the Bush administration, harm reduction wasn't allowed. Needle exchanges weren't allowed. Things that were viewed as harm reduction that didn't lead to full-on abstinence for people who were addicted to drugs weren't supported by government dollars. We actually now find ourselves in an environment that allows the support of that, and recognizing that getting into full-on abstinence may not be the easiest thing in the world, and we have to keep people alive until they have an opportunity to help themselves.
It's interesting that when I was at University of Michigan the same time with you, I was studying psychology, and I was interested in community psychology, and that's the area that I spent most of my time in. I had a good mentor there, and we were talking about the role of the community in faith-based organizations and community organizations and nonprofits and all those people, and how, because back then we were actually talking about deinstitutionalizing mental health. And so we were talking about how we can get all these support structures and everything lined up. It's funny, I walked away from that and went and worked in the mental hospital for almost 3 years after that. But that's the sort of thing that makes the connection between people who are suffering in the community and whether they survive and turn the corner or not, is what kind of support there's out there in the community. Tell me, what took you in this direction? Did something happen in medical school? Was there something that happened at Wesleyan that led you to being an expert in this field?
Expert, that's an interesting term for it. I would say I did a lot of street research on drugs at Wesleyan.
I don't think that was unusual.
It wasn't unusual with the crew that I ran with. And there were some that didn't do as much or any. But, I came to Wesleyan with a very, the most I'd ever been exposed to was some alcohol. And I think I drank alcoholically from the first time I had a drink. During my adolescence, I think I was an alcoholic during my adolescence, based on how I used alcohol. But then I met people who introduced me, who were more experienced, and introduced me to a wider variety of substances when I was at Wesleyan. And that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And I think that, I had a lot of really innate skills and intelligence that allowed me to, go through Michigan and go through Wesleyan, even though I was a prodigious consumption of drugs during that time. And it really all came down on me when I got out of medical school, and I started, was in a marriage where my use of alcohol and drugs was under a different kind of microscope than if you're living singular, on your own. And there was a day
And
that
having
my
friends
husband,
rooting you on, rather than, yeah.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes,
Yeah.
there was a day when
Football
my
friends.
husband came home and he said, "Change your ways or change your address." And it's a common, it happens commonly with people. And you have the choice to either change your ways or change your address. And many people make multiple geographic changes before they, really hit that wall. But I wanted to be where I was, and I went to treatment, and it worked for me. And but then I decided, as a way to really keep what I gained in treatment, that I had to stop my selfish ways and to become more selfless. And I began to dedicate my time and my career to helping the still suffering alcoholic. And it was really by accident that I got the opportunity to do so. I was doing physical exams on in Robert Taylor homes as a
Mhm.
part-time job while I was going through treatment. And it was a way to, keep my hands in medicine, but also to give me the time that I needed to rehabilitate my life. And I found that the people who were in those rooms had so much more joy and happiness than I'd ever experienced, that I wanted what they had. And I began to work in the field, and the field was really, we didn't even have a national society at that point. We didn't have a national exam. And I joined that movement very early on, took the first national exam, certifying physicians about the knowledge base, and later really devoted my medical career and time to it. Later became the president of the society and served for many years in a variety of ways there. Right now, we're writing the history of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and I'm on the editorial committee. I was going to be a journalist, actually, when I was in high school. Like many other people who were at Wesleyan, they were the editors of their high school papers, or they were the editors of their yearbooks. And I actually spent summers when I went back home to Jackson, Michigan, working for the Jackson Sit Pat when I was at Wesleyan. And I saw myself sort of as a journalist, but I got bitten by the science bug when I was at Wesleyan and decided to go into medicine. But I am on that committee, and we're writing the history, and there's not a bit of it that I hadn't experienced, because I was there from the beginning. And we were, once a society of 3,500 doctors with a specialty in addiction medicine. We now have a American Board of Medical Specialties, recognized subspecialty in preventative medicine, and many more people working to treat this disorder.
Yep, and very much needed. So it all sort of in a negative way started at Wesleyan.
Well, my husband says that I have that unique ability of always making lemonade out of the lemons that life has served me. And it's served quite a few, but that's life. Max Tischler was my mentor. And
Yeah.
I took a class from him, chemistry and the discovery and development of drugs. I wrote a paper on the opioid receptors, which was very new science at the time. And I've been involved in that area of study for a very long time, and it has served me well. In everything that I do now, it sort of it comes together, and it builds off of the things that I've learned and the experiences that I've had. And so I've made sense out of a career that doesn't make sense. The drug czar under Bush, who was my boss, used to say, no one as a kid grows up thinking I'm going to be the drug czar. It happens. And I was the first person who was openly in recovery to go through a Senate confirmation. They wanted to have a meeting on the floor of the Senate reviewing my drug use history. I had to find people who would certify that the things that I said about what I had used in my life were in fact true. Imagine that. Because it, sort of put the other person kind of at risk. I didn't put your name
Yeah.
down, by the way.
Well, I never offered you anything other than maybe a joint or something like that. But I knew people who came to me at Wesleyan and says, "You want a skin pop?" And I'm going like, "Are you nuts?"
There wasn't.
And you weren't one of them. So,
One of the first AIDS deaths that I knew of was in an individual who used heroin on the campus.
but yeah, that's the sort of stuff, Well, I had my first LSD trip on campus. Yeah,
But
1970s.
there were
Yeah.
drugs everywhere. I mean, I remember the summer program. A lot of us get introduced to stuff. Although I never took a trip. That was, if I think about the things that I might have done in my life, I didn't use the hallucinogens. I just couldn't bring myself to do that. But I'm not saying that because I'm proud of it. I'm saying it because it's just a fact.
Well, that was our friend too who did that and got me in trouble with my girlfriend back there. You remember Nidia, and I was tripping when I was supposed to be helping her with her English paper, and so that was what I remember of my one and only trip that I did at Wesleyan, was that I got in deep doo doo with with her because I was laughing at all her mistakes. I have a story about why I chose Wesleyan that I tell every once in a while, and it's a true story. And I wonder what your story is, and I'll tell mine first.
Okay.
So I was admitted. I went to Choate, which is now Choate Rosemary Hall, private school in Connecticut, and so I was at the top of the University of Michigan's list of recruits, and they gave me a full scholarship, books. They were going to pay for everything. And so I went there for pre-freshman weekend, which is, when they show you around campus and that sort of thing, and let you know, and they show you what classrooms are like and everything. But I got pulled into a group of people who were just like doing drugs so heavily and partying that I said, I can't possibly go to the school because I'll end up dying. I'll be on the street and I won't have an education. And so I turned down the full scholarship at University of Michigan and chose to go to the school up the road, which, I thought was very politically active and amazingly, focused on doing things that are progressive. I could have just stayed in Michigan, come back to Michigan and gone to the University of Michigan, and they would have welcomed me and given me everything I wanted. Um, and Wesleyan was on my list of a few schools. It was Tufts and and Boston College and the University of Michigan, and there were a couple other schools. I don't remember now. They weren't. I wasn't too excited about them. But Wesleyan was on one of my lists because people from Wesleyan had come down and visited me at Choate when I was doing a radio show there, because they were interested in what me and my buddies were doing on the air. And then I met
Hmm.
Randy Miller. Remember Randy
Ah,
Miller?
yes, of course.
And and he impressed me. I said, "Wow, this may be actually a safe place to go." So I chose Wesleyan. So what's your Wesleyan story? How did you get from Michigan to Wesleyan?
My high school in the city where I grew up was built to service people who fled the city when desegregation happened. So
Okay.
they fled the city. You hear Kamala Harris talk about it. In the fourth grade, I was on a bus load of children who got bused to a school, one classroom to give a 12% population in the school as African-American students. Nothing but Black kids from my school were bused, even though our school had some white families attending still. And we would arrive after the first bell. We'd get on the bus before the last bell. We were discharged from our classroom after the lunch bell. So we were last in line for lunch. So we had less time to interact on the playground during the lunch break. But we were in the classroom and we got to be counted in the desegregation efforts. But a lot of people fled the city to the suburbs or exurb during that time. And so many people fled, and the baby boomers were coming along. The high school couldn't service the needs of all the kids who were coming along at that time. And a new high school was built on the edge of the city. And the population that went there was very wealthy. And in order to keep the balance, my neighborhood got bused to that school. So I went to a very exclusive, it was Archote, but it was a public school. And I was college prep, and one of 2 or 3 African-American kids and my college prep kids, similar experience to what my kids experienced when they were going through their large city suburban high school just recently. But we were all very competitive, and I'm competitive. If you know anything
Yeah, you
about
are.
me, you know that I'm competitive. I fight when it's not necessary. And so, they weren't going to get or do anything that I wasn't going to get or do. And so I went to every, college meeting with counselors and so forth. And I had good scores. And I think at that time, a lot of the elite schools were looking for scholars, SAT scholars. And I was getting letters from everybody. But the letter from Wesleyan spoke to me. I remember today still how I felt when I started getting their letters, as if they were speaking to me and they were recruiting me. And it was probably the same anonymous letter that they were sending to everybody, but
But it was a Wesleyan letter.
It was a Wesleyan letter, and it spoke to me. And I felt like they wanted me there. And I applied and got in, and I wanted to go there because I felt like they welcomed me.
We haven't run across each other very much.
I think we did at one of our reunions, the one where like in 2002, you were there, we marched together.
Yeah,
but I had my family with me in
2000,
2001 it would have been. I had my family with me, and I had to show them a lot of stuff, and I didn't get to hang on campus as much. And you weren't at the other ones when I was a trustee. When I was there, I was the one where Obama spoke, but you weren't back because it was one of our years.
Yeah, I wasn't there, and there's reunions are kind of interesting because I've done different things at different reunions, and I was a class secretary, and so I had to kind of supposedly follow people. But I know one reunion, we just hung out at Jay's house the entire time. I didn't do any interaction with anyone else. We just hung out at Jay Hogarth's house with our kids. I had my oldest son with me, and the other folks had their kids, and we just hung out with our kids at
He's the one that went to Yale, right?
My oldest son actually didn't go to college. He went and worked for a television station, television station, and now is a director at ESPN, still without a degree. I think ESPN is sending him to school to finally get a degree so that he can have a degree just like everybody else there who's got journalism degrees. But he's done it all without a degree. My youngest one is the one that went to Yale and NYU and is practicing in New York right now, medicine.
I have an artist, an improv actor who now works for John Oliver in the writer's room. Yeah.
Cool.
And a social worker who actually is creating, he creates websites that generate passive income. And he's doing one now to teach people how to create relationships because marriages fail. And so, how do you build a contract for a relationship in which everyone's wishes and needs are honored? So he's kind of using his skills, but he's more of a computer nerd, and he'd rather be gaming.
He's a computer nerd who's the son of a psychiatrist, right?
Yes.
Who's pulling it together.
He has a degree in social work, but he's never worked in the area, and I think it was just for him, I can do this and I'm going to do this, but I'd rather play computer games.
My oldest one was born in 79, which makes me have one of the older kids in the class.
Yes.
But my daughter was born in 80 and another one born in 82, and they are in that cusp where technology wasn't the first thing they had in their hands when they were children, but it's something that they embraced in middle school.
All their lives.
Yeah, in high school.
Mhm.
So let's
Actually,
see.
my oldest was born in 82,
Okay.
and he got his first computer when he was 3. And I remember going to work one day. I used to solve all his problems. I was leaving for work one day and he had a problem. And I was like, Dave, I got to go to work. I can't help you with it. He's an early reader. So I threw a book at him that my brother had left at our house. And when I got home, the book was read, the problem was solved. And I knew that I was in trouble. And he's
Yeah.
been that way ever since. It's like
Yeah.
some days I feel like I have a phone attached to my ear from phone calls. He actually has always had a keyboard attached to his hands. And it's just, if he doesn't read it on the internet, I think it's downloaded to his brain at night.
And my youngest was 82, and he approaches medicine that way, you know, which is he's very technical, and he's been going around the world teaching doctors how to use the ultrasound for diagnostic prevention of heart and respiratory complications of anesthesia. But he's very technical like that. It's like he's going like, the smaller it gets, you know, it's going to be like a tricorder in Star Trek. You know, I can just scan somebody and be able to, you know, that's his goal. is to be like the doctors on Star Trek. You know, we're in our class now, 45 years, looking at 50 years after coming in as 17, 18, 19-year-olds at Wesleyan, starting Wesleyan, getting to know each other, and then graduating. It's almost 50 years ago. We all have these different journeys, and we all get a little bit of wisdom from it. What's yours?
I've teach people that I work with about the journeys of the decades. So I'll say something about that, and then I'll say what my particular wisdom is. You know, the decades of the 20s, the decades of promise. That's where we met, where anybody that you saw could be anything they wanted to be. And you could see all the potential in the world and the people that you met in yourself. And we basically took on whatever identity made sense to us. You know, we were able to discard our identity, particularly those who were leaving, home. We didn't go to the big, state university where everybody else was who knew us. We could start anew, and we did. The decade of the 30s was the decade of reality, where we actually began to see that what that promise, how much of that promise we could achieve. And so reality began to set in. The decades of the 40s is the decade of loss. You lose something, either your parents, some of your health. Some people lost the relationships that they created. Some people's kids left home and they had to find a new way of living with a partner that they hadn't talked to because they talked about the kids and not to one another. The decades of the 50s is sort of the decade of reconciliation, where you actually, when you get into your 50s, and I was talking with a niece recently, you just don't have things around you that don't make sense anymore. You find that you don't have to compromise, and you just don't do it. And you have people surround yourself with the people that you want to be with and be alike, and you don't put up with nonsense. After that, I mean, it used to be based on a much shorter lifespan, but it's a different kind of reconciliation where we begin to look at, have we left an imprint of which we'll be proud? Have we done something that means something and makes sense? And I'm kind of in that phase. Most of us are in that phase, trying to figure out that when we look back, did we make a contribution here? It's not too late to start doing something that does. Much of the work that I'm engaged in right now is that kind of work, making sense out of all the disparate experiences that I have and trying to drive a few goals. I mean, I was working with people who were, they were putting together unmet need with unused space or crowdsourcing COVID testing, and they're morphing that company into a different thing now. And so really, how do you make sense of your life and have made something come about it? But at the end of the day, what I think is most important is that I have learned how to feel. And I operate in a way where, to me, feelings are fact. And I understand my world through the way that I feel. And, I'll tell you that in my early life, I avoided knowing what I feel. I thought sought chemical solutions to life's problems. And in finding recovery, I now want to experience what I feel so that I can react in the now, no other way, and embrace and resolve whatever's going on and move on to the next thing. I think it struck me most when my mother died, and I turned to David, my husband, and I said, I'm so happy that I'm in recovery now, that I can feel the loss of her death.
Hmm.
Who would want to feel that pain, but so that I can feel that loss and I don't have to try to, be a Valiant zombie like some people are at funerals, and have to process the loss later. I deal with my joy and my pain as it comes. And, so what I seek is being a feeling present person. And that's the code for my life.
We don't get to move on through the phases of our lives until we do closure on the phases of our lives that we've gone through. You live not too far in Chicagoland from Cheryl Woodson, who I also spoke with in this series. And she has this thing about the 330s, the first 30, the second 30, and the third 30. And now when we're in our 60s, we're in our third 30. And that's where we do open up our possibilities for the things that we can do based on what
Yeah.
we know before. And I think you have a nice addition to that is if you've resolved the things and you know how to feel about what you've been in the past, then you can do this third 30 really well.
Cheryl's practice, she lives in the third 30. Cheryl lives in the third 30 with most of her patients because she has that geriatric medicine practice,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, so she sees it. And being able to bear witness to someone's end of life experience has got to have taught her a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
I get to bear witness to everybody's rebirth. I remember the first time I watched the baby being born and how exhilarating that was. But man, I watch babies being born every day when people get into recovery.
Ah.
And there's nothing more exhilarating. People will say when they hear I'm in addiction medicine, my God, that must be difficult. And it's like, no, it's the most beautiful thing in the world to watch someone being reborn.
This has been beautiful talking to you after all these years, and to hear about your journey and to share it with our classmates. I'm completely honored.
Oh, I thank you for selecting me and giving me this opportunity to spend some time with you after all these years.
Thanks a lot, Andrea Grubb Barthwell, for being part of the series for our virtual reunion. Unfortunately, we can't get together because of COVID. I know as one of the trustees, you guys are going to be on campus. Be safe. I know you're vaccinated, but be safe anyway. And enjoy the beautiful Wesleyan campus while you're out there this spring. And hopefully we'll have more and more of these sort of videos posted for everybody to see, and we can enjoy them at our leisure. So
Thank
thank
you.
you
Thank
again.
you. I look forward to catching up with other people through this mechanism and seeing you at our 50th.
Yes, looking forward to the 50th.
Yes.